Hey guys, here today with another Sergey Knife Notes video. Today we have in front of us an F95 Seashell. Now the F95 Seashell is a custom piece from Sergey, and this one in particular is of 2014 vintage here. If you take a look at the back spacer, you can see that this knife was made in June of 2014. I believe this was made available around the time of Blade Show. And in fact, I'm not actually sure of how this piece was made available, but around that time frame was when Sergey, I believe, started first doing the auctions and the lottos for the full customs. But even going just a couple years further back, the customs were actually just available on table at, say, Blade Show, for example, to buy, which I think is really cool. So it really goes to show you just how far Sergey has come as a maker in terms of desirability, and also the styling and design that goes into the customs. If we compare this knife to, say, an F7, you can see that they're the same platform, the same exact size, but there's a lot of work that goes into the F7 to distinguish it from a normal F95. If you take a look at the newer F95s, you can see this one is a limited production that has work done on it in collaboration with another maker, in this case Dmitry Sinkovich. But you can see that there's been a really noticeable progression in the features and how they trickle down from the customs eventually into the production knives themselves. So it's really cool to take a look at these older knives, and this one was sent in by a friend for the purpose of this video. Again, I really appreciate that. He does carry this knife, so there might be some wear marks on that. I apologize. But let's go ahead and take a look at the specifications of the knife, particularly the weight. I do want to throw it up here. Not really going to measure the size since I've done so many videos on knives in this F95 size range. It's exactly the same size as the other ones, but I do think it is interesting. It will be interesting to take a look at the weight here. And for the weight, we have, let's see, whoops. We have 4.86 ounces. So again, definitely a little bit more weight than the production knives, given its 3D contoured handles, but nothing too significant. For the size, this knife doesn't really feel heavy in my experience compared to other Sergey knives. Now, taking a look at the blade here, you can see we have this beautiful DLC coated blade. The blade stock is 4mm, so standard stock thickness, and the steel is 10V, as you can see here. Now, a little bit about the knife itself. These older customs, they really didn't come with any of the coins that you see nowadays with the full customs that indicate the specifications of the knife. It was really just a card on the table. Later on, moved on to kind of a dog tag specification with the specifications laser engraved on a dog tag. But I think this knife doesn't really come with any identification besides what Sergey did say at the show. But yeah, as you can see here, we have the blade steel laser engraved in the normal traditional spot that we see for production knives, from even up to this point today. The newer customs tend to have on the blade tang here, so that the blade has a more sterile look. But from this time period, you can see we have the blade steel laser engraved in the same spot. You also have this 1 of 9 laser engraving. Now, this was done non-sequentially, so all of the knives that were supposedly in this series all say 1 of 9, and I think the 1 of 9 also is kind of significant. So talking a little bit more about the DLC coating, Sergey has used DLC and also PVD on handles to a lesser extent, very infrequently. The other two knives I can really think of that have PVD handles would be the Club Hati and the Seashell hottie with the black normal weave carbon fiber. And the only other knives that I can remember with DLC blades would be, I believe I've seen a custom division hottie and also a custom F3 with lightning strike carbon fiber scales. There really just aren't many knives that Sergey has put out with DLC coating on any part of the knife. And it seems like a reason for that, I actually asked him about this recently. It seems that the rejection rate from the company that they were going with for the coatings was just too high. And another interesting tidbit about this knife is that despite the laser engraving on the blade saying 1 of 9, only 5 knives, I believe, were eventually produced. It seemed like the original plan was to have a mix of these Seashell DLC blades with some with the Tikron hardware you can see here, which is a type of Russian kind of Timascus, and others with more with planar hardware. However, eventually the only knives that were produced all had the Tikron hardware. I believe 5 or 6 in total ended up getting produced. Despite the blade again saying that this is 1 of 9, I can probably assume, taking a look here at the laser engraving, it doesn't look like it stands out too much, or even that the blade was laser engraved before the DLC coating. But I find that interesting that only 5 or 6 of the knives eventually did end up being produced. And the other ones, not really sure why, but I can hazard a guess that it's probably due to the PBD, the DLC coating rejection rate. The blades that Sergey probably got back just weren't up to the standards for the coating, and so they eventually didn't make the knife. But that is an interesting tidbit about this knife. The engraving on the blade is actually incorrect to how many of these knives are actually out there. Now, another thing about the blade profile, you can kind of see here that it is a very plain blade profile for a Shurgorov knife. It's a full flat grind, no jimping on the top of the spine. And of course, being a knife from this time period, it has the traditional F95 blade profile that comes out a little bit straighter here on the edge farther than what we see on the newer, what I used to call the F5 blade profile, which has a little bit more belly. But now that this blade profile is pretty much on all the knives in the size range, really no point in calling it specifically the F5 blade profile. But yes, we do have the most traditional F95 type blade here. Honestly, I think a lot of people really want that more unique blade profile with the flats. The jimping, of course, I can see from a functionality perspective is quite desirable, but other knives you can see, taking a look at this more modern production, we have blade flats, jimping, and also the extract cut, which would be considered a very high configuration back in the day. Before they were doing kind of just the entry model and the more premium production model, there was a whole range of classifications for the production knives. They used the bears classification from 1, 2 to 3 bears, and depending on the blade steel used, anodization on the handle, the configuration of the blade, it could be anywhere from 1 to 3 bears. So say a premium a premium steel with a basic full flat grind like this might be considered a 2 bear, or a knife with a more basic steel like a S30V, but jimping and an extract cut and blade flats would be considered a 2 bears as well. So it's really just the combination of the features that determine the classification. Nowadays, again, we really don't have that. Everything is all simplified. But this blade profile does harken back to those days where you have kind of this full flat grind, which some people might find desirable from a usability standpoint. Moving on to the handle here, you can see that we have this very beautiful bronze anodization. I did used to think that this was a unique color, but now that I think about it, we take a look here at the Sinkovich Touch from FMBA, and you can see here that we have a very similar color scheme. The Quantum EX that actually debuts as show special knives in Russia also has a similar anodization color scheme. So it's nice to see this color being brought back after so many years. The hardware here, as you can see, is that Tikron, which is a Russian form of Timascus or Mokutai, or whatever you want to call it. It does have these very beautiful layers, much tighter pattern, denser pattern that I really like. Really, you don't see Sergey using this material too much anymore. It's kind of on and off. Some knives recently, obviously customs only, have been using it, but you know, not as common as Timascus, both for Sergey and just the knife making world in general. The handles themselves has the seashell pattern, of which the knife is named after. The seashell pattern, a lot of people actually get confused with the Hati wave pattern that you see on the production Hati. But as you can see here, the seashell is more of a fluting, where the flutes are all pretty much in the same angle, diagonal, and goes across the handle here, as opposed to the Hati wave, which has more of a horizontal flowing wave pattern. This, you wouldn't really consider this a wave pattern. There's also what I like to call these extract cuts here on the spine of the handle, something similar to what Sergey in the workshop refers to as extract cuts on the blade here. Really nice touch, and I think is one of those things that Sergey just does to enhance the aesthetics of the knife. As you can see here, these are 3D contoured handles, so that does make them a little bit thicker than a normal production F95. This does have a 3.2 super slim blade stock, but the handles on this, I believe, are pretty much the exact same as a normal production F95, and you can see that the 3D contoured handles doesn't make it noticeably thicker. But given the you know, the ergos of the knife, I really think that having these 3D contoured handles makes the knife much more pleasant to hold. Just filling out your hand makes it makes for a really nice experience, in my opinion. Here, another thing to note as well is these screws, being an older custom from this time period, it does not have the index screws, nor did Sergey kind of flip the rear screw to have it completely, to have the female Chicago side being shown here. I don't have any knives as an example of that where he flips the screw, but it is something that's also done on the custom divisions. The custom divisions as well, the newer ones, have index pivots like this here, where, you know, just to have a more consistent look on the show side, this is a non-free spinning pivot, where the real screw is on the lock side here. So this has the same screw setup in appearance to the production knives, where the real screw is on the show side. What this means is, you know, the screws can be indexed differently from, you know, model to model. This is true even on the customs. However, taking a look at the lock side of the knife, you can see, again, we have that seashell pattern being continued, but the caps of the screw on what you would consider normally the female side for the productions is also done in that Tikron as well. So unlike the productions, or most productions, where you have a female screw that includes the shaft and the male portion of the male screw that has the threads, this actually just has a double threaded shaft here with two end caps, one being completely flat and the other having the actual screw face itself, screw head, the duckfoot custom screw head. Same thing with the rear screw as well, being done in that material. And also the clip screw and the clip are done in the Tikron as well. And I think the clip is really where you get to see the beautiful layers of that Tikron material. I know some people really like the bold colors, alternating colors and layers of the like, you know, Alpha Knife Supply's Timascus and Mokutai, which I believe is made by Nichols. But I really do like the subtle coloration of the Tikron, and also just the really organic patterns that you see here. From a distance, it's not, you know, super flashy. The colors aren't super contrasting like you see here on my F7 clip. And it just makes for a really nice and kind of restrained look here, while still having that splash of color. The clip here as well, you can see is what I consider the fancier F95 clip that you see on the custom divisions and again, customs of this time period. It has this curved lip here on the top, which I think aesthetically is much more pleasing than the production F95 clips, which has a more angular look to it. The retention on these clips, in my opinion as well, is also nicer. There's a very large contact patch, and again, very generous rounding off of this top area here for ease of insertion into your pants to clip the knife on. Now the backspacer is also something that's very interesting, given that Tikron has much denser layering than say Timascus. This effect that you get here when the material is cross-cut doesn't look nearly as dramatic as what you get with Timascus, where the layers have much higher contrast. But if you look here, you can see the layers of the Tikron material. But again, I think this is one application where maybe perhaps Timascus does win out. Since the layering is so dense here, it just kind of appears as a blue blob. But it is the same material as the rest of the hardware. The only exception to that is the lock bar insert screw here. Interesting, it is still a Torx that you see on the production knives of the same time period, and even now. But instead of being made out of polished steel, it's actually made out of titanium that is then anodized the exact same color as the handle. So again, really nice attention to detail there, and something you would expect on Sergey's customs. Now, of course, this knife does have double row roller bearings as signified by this engraving here. And this being an older knife from 2014, this does have the original race configuration for the double row roller bearings, which has true, in my opinion, double rows, where the inner row is its own distinct row. A little bit difficult to describe. But the newer F7s and newer customs in general tend to have a staggered double row roller bearing, where instead of the rollers being kind of touching each other as they are on the original, they're kind of staggered, so they're kind of moved inwards, just so that there's more space to have a smaller pivot bearing, roller bearing cage. So that's something that I find interesting as well, just to see the generational, I guess, changes to not only the exterior of the knife, but also the interior as well. Another thing to note is that, you know, this being an F95 and this being an F7, the F7 is basically its own model as a custom. None of the hardware is really shared with the production F95s that still exist to this day, while this being an F95 custom is basically using a similar construction and you know, dimension in terms of the parts used to construct the knife, the backspacer here, the clip, the blade profile, the rest of the hardware is pretty much the same as a normal production F95, just with enhancements in terms of the blade material, for example, the milling on the handle, that 3D contouring. And so you really see that differentiation there. And again, this is just another testament to how far Sergey has come as a custom knife maker. But to that point, the milling on the custom F95s of this time period actually were very similar to what you saw on the custom divisions. The custom division Seashell Hati had similar milling on the lock side, and the custom division F95s also had similar milling as well. This is distinctly different though from the milling on the production knives. Now, when the milling eventually came to the production knives, Sergey made a point to make sure that the milling pattern is different, distinctly different. You can see here with this wave in the middle, than the custom divisions, which I think to this day, the custom division 95s, if I think the most recent one, the antique, does have the same milling as the F95s. from way back when, both custom division and custom. So again, another thing that Sergey does to kind of keep that distinction alive. But otherwise, really cool knife. Again, I can't state that enough. I really love that this knife is being used. It has a steel with monster edge retention. Really cool, very practical. I guess a very, very practical blade configuration, if I'd say. And again, I really appreciate having the opportunity to have this piece in here so that I could take a look at it and kind of talk to you a little bit about the history of Sergey's Customs. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope to see you guys next time.